Welcome, biology students. This is chapter 10 in the endocrine system. There's a lot in the endocrine system. It mainly has to do with the functions and mechanisms of all of your hormones and how they're controlled, starting in your brain with your hypothalamus and your pituitary gland, and then its effect on all of the glands in your body. The main function of the endocrine system is to coordinate body systems and maintain homeostasis. It works right in contact with your nervous system, and endocrine glands contain secretory cells that release their products, hormones, into extracellular fluid where they diffuse into the bloodstream. And hormones are the name of the type of chemical messenger of the body. Endocrine glands secrete their products into ducts, leading to body surfaces or cavities, or spaces within organs. And oil and salivary glands are examples of exocrine glands. But we'll be focusing on endocrine glands today. These are pictures of exocrine glands, how they have a secretory portion and a duct where it secretes its products. These are the major endocrine glands. I'll let you read through those: pituitary, thyroid, adrenals. Your adrenals are on top of your kidneys. And these are organs with some endocrine tissue. So the endocrine tissue is involved in these organs, and you can see them here: the hypothalamus and the thymus. The hypothalamus is in the brain. The thymus is in part of your lymphatic system: pancreas, ovaries, testes, heart, placenta in childbearing, stomach, small intestine, and kidneys. So here's just a brief overview of the endocrine system and some organs that have endocrine tissue in them. The hypothalamus is a big one in the brain, and it will control the hormones that are secreted from the pituitary gland. And we divide the pituitary gland in an anterior and a posterior part. And these are all the hormones that are released from the anterior part of the pituitary gland. And these are all of the hormones released from the posterior part. There's just two released from the posterior lobe of your pituitary gland. And then you can see here it lists all the glands and then the hormones that are being secreted. Hormones travel in the bloodstream. They typically affect a particular type of cell called a target cell. And these target cells have receptors, which are protein molecules that recognize and bind the specific hormones. Cells other than target cells lack the correct receptors and are unaffected by the hormone. The mechanism by which a hormone influences target cells depends on the chemical makeup. There's two types of hormones. They can be lipid soluble or water soluble. Lipid soluble means they can dissolve in lipids, like fats. Water soluble means they can dissolve in water. Lipid soluble hormones include steroid hormones, and they are derived from cholesterol. And the main organs and glands that secrete steroid hormones are the ovaries, the testes, and the adrenal glands. Lipid soluble hormones can move easily through any target cell's plasma membrane, because the plasma membrane, if you remember, is made of lipids, that phospholipid bilayer. Lipid soluble hormones can get through the target cell's membrane easily. Once inside the target cell, the steroid hormone can combine with the receptor molecules, and then in the nucleus, the hormone receptor complex attaches to DNA and activates certain genes and synthesizes specific proteins. So here's just a look at how a steroid hormone diffuses through the plasma membrane of the cell. It's lipid soluble, so it can get right through or dissolve through the lipid bilayer. And that how it'll bind to receptors, get into the nucleus and affect the DNA and activate certain genes from the cell of the nucleus. So this is how steroid hormones will have their effect. Water-soluble hormones are made of amino acids. They can't pass that lipid bilayer. They're considered the first messengers, and they will stimulate second messengers within the cell after they bind just to the surface of the cell. And those second messengers inside the cell are the ones that will carry out the effect of the hormone. One common second messenger is cyclic adenosine monophosphate, so CAMP we call it. Hormones will bind to a receptor site on the target cell membrane, promoting the conversion of ATP to this CAMP molecule. And then CAMP then activates an enzyme cascade, which will activate proteins already in the cell. So this is a look how a water-soluble hormone has to bind to a receptor on the outside of the membrane because it can't get through that lipid bilayer. And the example it gives us here is it activates the conversion of ATP to CAMP. And this cyclic AMP has a lot of different functions in cells and in the body. So summary, lipid-soluble hormones move into the cell and stimulate the synthesis of proteins, and water-soluble hormones activate proteins already present in the cell, and they do this without ever entering the cell because they cannot pass the lipid bilayer. Research now also indicates that steroid hormones may have additional mechanisms of action, including interacting with other membrane receptors too. So this is a great video of the steroid and lipid hormones and how they pass through. Negative feedback mechanism is really important in the endocrine system. The increased blood level of a hormone inhibits its further release. So that just means when the levels of a hormone are adequate in the body, they go up and tell the brain, okay, you can stop sending us more hormones because there's enough of us. Alternatively, some endocrine glands are sensitive to the particular condition they regulate rather than to the level of hormone they produce. So the pancreas will stop secreting insulin, not when there's enough insulin around, but when it senses that the levels of blood glucose are declining enough. Here's another video about some of the different functions of those hormone glands. We can also talk about positive feedback mechanism, where an outcome of a process further stimulates the process. And a great example of this is childbirth. Oxytocin stimulates uterine contractions, and it's a positive feedback mechanism. There'll just be more oxytocin released until the end result, or the birth of the child, and then it'll shut off. It's much less common than negative feedback. So here is an example of the positive feedback. Interactions between hormones, just like the muscles and bones of the body, they can be antagonistic and synergistic. Antagonistic means the effect of one hormone opposes that of another hormone, and synergistic means they work in combination with other hormones to provide a much greater response. The word permissive means that one hormone must be present for another hormone to exert its effects. The pituitary gland is located at the base of the brain. It consists of these two lobes, the anterior and posterior lobe. They're both in direct connection to the hypothalamus, whether that's circulatory connection through blood vessels or neural connection through neurons. The anterior pituitary is connected to the hypothalamus, which will synthesize and secrete what we call releasing and inhibiting hormones. Releasing hormones stimulate the hormone secretion by your anterior pituitary, and inhibiting hormones will do the opposite, inhibit secretion. So these are the 7 hormones that are released from the anterior pituitary, and you can see them listed here. The posterior pituitary just releases 2. So we have our smooth muscle oxytocin, antidiuretic hormone, mammary gland, so it'll also stimulate breast milk production, your thyroid gland, the cortex of the adrenal gland, prolactin, which will stimulate the breast to create milk, growth hormone, and follicle stimulating hormone to affect your ovaries and testes. So these are the 6 main hormones. I said 7, there's 6 groups of them. Follicle stimulating and luteinizing hormone will affect both the ovaries and testes, and they're listed here for you. The anterior lobe secretes 2 hormones of the hypothalamus regulate the synthesis and release of growth hormone. And we have growth hormone, releasing hormone, which stimulates the release of growth hormone. So your hypothalamus will release this GHRH, which will stimulate your anterior lobe to release growth hormone. And your growth hormone inhibiting hormone will inhibit the release of growth hormone from the anterior lobe. Growth hormone stimulates the rate of cell division and increase in cell size. So the nice thing about growth hormone is that the name of this hormone tells you what it does. The target cells will include bone, muscle, and cartilage, and just trying to increase their cell size. We have disorders with this hormone. Gigantism is abnormally high production of growth hormone in your childhood when the bones are still capable of lengthening. So you get really gigantic or tall people. Acromegaly are high levels of growth hormone in adulthood when the bones can thicken kind of in diameter, but not actually lengthen. So you get kind of a big neck, big arms, just kind of more of a bulky appearance in your bones. And pituitary dwarfism is insufficient production of growth hormone in childhood. There are other types of dwarfism, and this can be treated by administering growth hormone in childhood. Other types of dwarfism you cannot treat. So this is a look at gigantism. So it's increasing growth hormone in childhood for that young man. This is acromegaly. You can see how normally she's fine, and probably around age 33 when she was an adult, her growth hormone levels had increased. And you can see how kind of in her neck and her face, her bones have gotten thicker. And this is pituitary dwarfism, a young child. It can be treated by injections of growth hormone, so insufficient. So this is caused by insufficient levels of growth hormone to begin with. Prolactin stimulates the mammary glands to produce milk. In excess, it can actually cause infertility and lactation when birth has not even occurred. And in males, it's involved in the production of mature sperm in the testes. Tropic hormones are hormones that influence the secretion of hormones by other glands. They include the following hormones of the anterior pituitary: TSH, ACTH, FSH, and LH. So these are hormones that influence the secretion of hormones by other glands. Thyroid stimulating hormone acts on the thyroid gland to stimulate the synthesis and release of your thyroid hormones. Adrenocorticotropic hormone controls the synthesis and secretion of glucocorticoid hormones from the cortex. That's the outer layer of your adrenal glands themselves. And FSH in females promotes the development of the egg cells, and in males it promotes the production of sperm cells because it's a follicle stimulating hormone. So it stimulates the production of your follicles, which are your sex cells, your egg and your sperm. And then luteinizing hormone in females causes ovulation and the secretion of estrogen and progesterone. And in males, it stimulates the production, secretion of testosterone. So basically, it's causing the secretion of other hormones in females and males. The posterior lobe are cells. Again, they only produce two hormones from the posterior lobe. Neurons manufacture antidiuretic hormone and oxytocin, and they travel down the nerve cells into the posterior pituitary where they are stored and released. So here's a great video of the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. Your posterior lobe, again, ADH, also known as vasopressin, it causes the kidneys to remove water from the fluid destined to become urine. So a deficiency of ADH results in what we call diabetes insipidus, which is different from your type 1 and type 2 diabetes, where it causes excess or excessive urine production and dehydration. And it can be treated by administering ADH in a nasal spray. And again, ADH causes your kidneys to retain water. And a lack of ADH would result in diabetes insipidus, so your kidneys would not retain water and you would continue to urinate frequently. Oxytocin then stimulates your uterine contractions of childbirth and the act of milk ejection from the mammary glands. In males, it may facilitate sexual behavior and the transport of sperm. So here's a look at how oxytocin will stimulate the ejection of milk from the mammary glands. The thyroid gland is shaped like a shield or a heart in the front of your neck. It produces thyroid hormone and calcitonin. Thyroid hormone includes T4 and T3. The broad effects of thyroid hormones, they do a lot in the body. And if your thyroid hormone levels are off, you can really feel it. Your thyroid hormones regulate metabolic rate and the production of heat, maintaining your blood pressure and promoting normal function of several other systems. So there's a look at where your thyroid hormone or your thyroid gland is located, right below the larynx. And it surrounds the trachea, and we'll talk about these structures when we get to respiratory system. A goiter is an enlarged thyroid gland. It can result from a diet deficient in iodine, which is needed for the production of thyroid hormone. So it can be treated by iodine supplements or administration of thyroid hormone itself. Cretinism is too little thyroid hormone during fetal development, and it can cause dwarfism and delayed mental and sexual development. Myxedema is too little thyroid hormone in adulthood. With too little thyroid hormone in adulthood, it can decrease your alertness, body temperature, and heart rate, and cause fluid to accumulate in your facial tissues. So here's a look at a simple goiter. It's where the thyroid becomes enlarged. So you'll see it in the neck, creatinism, and then exophthalmus, which will affect fluid accumulation in the eyes. Graves' disease is oversecretion of thyroid hormone. It's an autoimmune disorder in which antibodies mimic the action of thyroid stimulating hormone. Symptoms will include an increase in your metabolic rate and heart rate. So you'll lose weight, you'll sweat, you'll be nervous. And then exophthalmus, the picture from before, it'll be caused from fluid accumulation, but it'll cause your eyes to protrude forward. Calcitonin lowers the level of calcium in the blood, so it will inhibit the breakdown of bone and increases excretion of calcium in the urine. Inhibiting the breakdown in bone means because bone will not be broken down, calcium will stay in the bone where it is normally stored. So it'll lower the level of calcium in the blood surrounding bone. There's 4 small round masses at the back of the thyroid gland, and they secrete parathyroid hormone, PTH. This increases levels of calcium in the blood, so it'll stimulate your osteoclasts to break down bone, releasing calcium into the blood, and it'll inhibit osteoblasts. Undersecretion of parathyroid hormone can result in nervousness and muscle spasms, and oversecretion can pull calcium from bone tissue, causing weakened bones and elevated blood calcium levels, which could lead to kidney stones, calcium deposits, and decreased activity of your nervous system. So here's normal blood calcium, and whether you get a high level or low level, this is what your thyroid gland will secrete calcitonin, or your parathyroid gland will release parathyroid hormone. You can see the results of those 2 hormones and the effects they would cause to try to keep your blood calcium levels normal. Adrenal glands are located at the top of the kidneys. They're composed of your adrenal cortex, the outer region, which will secrete all of your corticoids. And the adrenal medulla, the inner region, secretes your epinephrine and your norepinephrine. These are kind of your stress hormones, so they'll respond to stress in the body. Gonadocorticoids are your androgens and estrogens. Your mineral corticoids have to do with mineral homeostasis and water balance. So one is aldosterone, which acts on cells of the kidney to increase reabsorption of sodium ions into the blood. Addison's disease is caused by the undersecretion of cortisol and aldosterone. It appears to be an autoimmune disorder, and the results are bronzing of your skin, weight loss, fatigue, electrolyte imbalance, poor appetite, and poor resistance. So here's a look at these people. John F. Kennedy, suffered from Addison's disease, which caused an undersecretion of cortisol and aldosterone from the adrenal cortex. You can see for yourself if he has a more bronzing appearance or if Maybe he was just tanning, I'm not sure. Glucocorticoids affect glucose homeostasis. They act on the liver to promote the conversion of fat and protein into intermediate substances. They inhibit the inflammatory response. Cushing's syndrome is characterized by the redistribution of body fat and fluid accumulation in the face, and it's caused by prolonged exposure to high levels of cortisol. It could be from a tumor in a part of the brain that will affect higher levels of cortisol to be released, and the use of the glucocorticoid hormones to treat asthma, lupus, or rheumatoid arthritis. Here's a patient with Cushing's syndrome and after treatment. So you can see a very noticeable difference after treatment from Cushing's syndrome. The adrenal medulla produces adrenaline and noradrenaline, or epinephrine and norepinephrine. And both of these hormones are used in our response to danger. They're physiological adjustments made by our bodies in the response to short-term stress. And during long-term stress, the hypothalamus communicates with the anterior pituitary via hormonal signals, and then the adrenal cortex. So this is just showing how your hypothalamus will communicate with the anterior pituitary that will act on the adrenal cortex to secrete mineralocorticoids, glucocorticoids for the long-term stress response, and act on the adrenal medulla to secrete epinephrine and norepinephrine from the nervous system for the short-term stress response. The pancreas is located behind the stomach. It has endocrine cells called pancreatic islets, and they produce glucagon and insulin hormones. Glucagon and insulin are two hormones created by the pancreas, and they have opposite effects. Glucagon increases glucose into the blood, so it will put more glucose into your blood levels. Insulin decreases glucose in the blood, so it stimulates the transport of glucose into muscle cells. It inhibits the breakdown of glycogen to glucose, and it prevents the conversion of amino acids and fatty acids to glucose. So here's a pancreatic islet cell. So here are normal blood glucose levels, and if blood glucose falls below normal, the pancreas will secrete glucagon that tells your liver to break down glycogen to glucose and put it into blood. If blood glucose levels rise above normal, such as after meals, your pancreas will secrete insulin to tell your liver to stop breaking down glycogen to glucose, and it'll increase glucose back into the blood. Metabolic disorders, diabetes mellitus. So this is the group of metabolic disorders characterized by abnormally high levels of glucose in the blood, and it's caused by problems with either insulin production or insulin function. The thymus gland lies on top of the heart. It secretes hormones that promote the maturation of T lymphocytes. The pineal gland is located in the center of the brain. It produces melatonin, and the levels of circulating melatonin are greater at night than during the daylight hours. The pineal gland receives input from the visual pathways, and it helps promote sleep, reduces jet lag, and it may slow aging. Too much melatonin can result in seasonal affective disorder, and this can be associated with winter and short days. And treatment just includes repeated exposure to very bright light to inhibit melatonin secretion. This is a common disorder in kind of the upper northern states of the United States, and also Alaska, where people do get this disorder. Local signaling molecules act very quickly on adjacent cells. These can include neurotransmitters, growth factors, nitric oxide, and prostaglandins. Prostaglandins have very diverse effects. They can help with reproductive system, inflammatory response, blood clotting, and body temperature. Growth factors stimulate cells to grow, develop, and multiply. And nitric oxide is a gas that leads to blood vessel dilation, and it can also aid in peristalsis, which is the act of moving something down a tube in your body and act as a neurotransmitter. So I know there was a lot in this chapter to know. You should have a general idea of which hormones are secreted from each lobe of the pituitary gland. I won't ask you too many details about the hormones themselves. I'll try to keep it pretty broad in this one. Hope you guys are all doing well. Let me know if you have any questions.